first bill hearing is on, oh, first of all, request for bill introductions. Does anyone on the committee have a request? Do not see any. Anybody back there have bills for us? Nope. Okay. Now we'll move on to the bill hearing. We have one bill, House Bill 2075. I will open that hearing and ask Natalie to let us know what it's about.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2075 changes the venue statute for agency adoptions. So Section 1 amends KSA 592126 to provide that when you're dealing with an agency adoption, when the state or a department of the state is the agency involved, then venue can be anywhere the department or any subcontracting agency has an office. And I can take any questions.
See, we have one hand up, Representative Carmichael.
Mr. Chairman, this legislation seems familiar. Ms. Scott, have we seen this before? And if so, do you recall when, where, and what happened to it?
We should just make that a standing question.
Yeah, actually,
it makes it easier to write the bill brief, to be honest with you, and my members always ask me the same question.
Yes, last biennium, this bill was introduced. It was House Bill 2587. It came to your committee. You guys passed it out of committee. It passed across the House floor 124-1. And then over in the Senate, it went to the Senate Judiciary Committee. They had hearings scheduled for March 17th, 18th, and 19th, all of which just kept getting canceled because of leaving for COVID. And then it died in the Senate committee.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. A fine answer. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions for Natalie? See any? We'll move on to proponents. We have one here in person, Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Carmichael, I was so looking forward to answering that question before you asked it. So yes, as you heard, we did see this last year. There were no opponents in the committee. And the purpose of this is that when there is an agency adoption, so say there's a DCF adoption out in Western Kansas, but there's not an attorney out there that either wants to do this, they're not super lucrative, maybe they don't want to do it, or they don't have experience, they might ask an attorney in Wichita to do it. But that attorney in Wichita would have to go out to Western Kansas. This changes it so that the venue, that we can have a proper venue in any county where there is and the agency has a business. So DCF, St. Francis, wherever they might have an office, then we can file the adoption in that county. And I think it will help just make it easier for people to get attorneys to do those agency adoptions. And I even ran into that during the interim. I was doing a DCF adoption, and we wanted to do it in Sedgwick County. I had to jump through some hoops to get that done. This would have made it easier. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I stand for questions.
Representative Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, is there something wrong with Western Kansas?
It's very spread out. There's not the density of attorneys out there. So nothing, we love it, nothing wrong with it whatsoever.
I have an observation, if I may. All the attorneys are excellent.
Yes, they're busy doing other things probably, so. Even though adoption is of utmost importance, I will say. Permanence for kiddos. Y'all know I feel that way, so.
Any other questions for Representative Humphreys? Do not see any. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you so much for hearing it.
Committee, you have written proponent testimony from Tanya Keys with the Department of Children and Families. Is there anyone else as a proponent? Seeing any? Are there any neutral conferees? Anyone opposed here today that would like to speak? Okay, going to close the hearing on House Bill 2075. Committee, I've been going over the list of bills that I'd like to work today. We're just going to start and go down in numerical order. The first one is House Bill 2049. If you can get that pulled up, we'll have Natalie refresh our memory.
Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2049 would prohibit a public agency from charging a fee to the Legislative Division of Post Audit for an open records request for the purpose of conducting an audit. And I can take any questions.
Any questions for Natalie? Do not see any. Are there any amendments? I believe there, Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd ask that the balloon amendment before the chair be distributed to the members of the committee. Recognizing that that will take a few moments, would you like for me to go ahead and address the balloon on its merits?
That would be great.
Okay. I promised Ms. Scott the opportunity to do this, but I think I've read it now and understand what I asked her to do. As you may recall, during the testimony on this bill, we heard from the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, the Kansas Press Association, and perhaps some others that were concerned that this bill was, that this provision was being placed in the Kansas Open Records Act. And they were of the opinion that they should also be entitled to free records under the Kansas Open Records Act. And we spent quite a bit of time talking about that. But by the time we were done, I think Mr. Stowe from Legislative Post Audit said what he really wanted was to get the records through the Legislative Post Audit statute rather than the KORA statute. And so as a result, I prepared this amendment, which basically takes the KORA provisions completely out of the bill and instead inserts a simple additional clause in the Legislative Post Audit statute that says, notwithstanding any other provision of law, no public agency that is the subject of an audit pursuant to this section or any other law shall charge a fee for copies of or access to the records described in subsection B, which are the records that they request. I think that for purposes of this bill, satisfies the broadcaster's concern, not that they want to abandon the issue, but if we take this out of KORA and put it over in the Legislative Post Audit statute, that at least avoids their concern for the time being. And meanwhile, Mr. Stowe and the fine people at Post Audit have a very clear statute that they can include in their request for records that makes it very clear that they do not pay other state agencies, and that includes cities and counties as well, for the records that they need to do their work on behalf of the legislature. So hopefully there will be a second for this at the appropriate time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So we have a motion by Representative Carmichael, a second by Representative Jennings. Any discussion on the amendment? Don't see any. Representative Carmichael, would you like to close?
Mr. Chairman, I move my amendment. Thank you.
Heard the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. The amendment is adopted. Any further amendments on House Bill 2049? Do not see any. It's the pleasure of the committee on House Bill 2049. Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we pass out HB 2049 as amended.
Favorably.
Favorably.
Is there a second? Representative Humphreys. Any discussion? Do not see any. Back to you, Representative Hoheisel, to close.
I close.
Heard the motion. All in favor say aye. All opposed say no. Motion carries. Kathy, the votes to record. Representative Owens, Representative Hoheisel, Representative O'Hobson, Representative Heiberger, and Representative Carmichael are all yes votes. Now, committee, pull up House Bill 2050. And we'll go back to Natalie to remind us what this one's about.
Mr. Chairman, House Bill 2050 would remove the requirement to submit certain documents to the Legislative Division of Post Audit You heard that long list of documents that now that post audit doesn't do financial audits. It's not really appropriate for them to receive those audits. So it would remove that requirement for submission for the statute. And I can take a vote. Any questions?
Any questions for Natalie? Not see any. Are there any amendments? See any of those either? It's the pleasure of the committee. Representative Jennings.
Mr. Chairman, I would move the committee recommend House Bill 2050 favorably for passage and that it be put on the consent calendar. And by way of explanation of that, I understand that since the House is not in session on the floor every day, that it has to be on there 3 days that we actually are in session. But given the character of this bill, to consume House floor debate time over something such as this does not seem prudent. Even if we came to an immediate end of the session, there'd be no damage done. I don't see any risk, and that's why I do this.
Okay. Is there a second? Representative Owens? Any discussion? Representative Hoheisel?
If I may, Mr. Chair, so days like tomorrow that were pro forma will not count as a 3-day. It'll be 3 days when we are actually meeting in the chamber.
That is correct. So if we only meet once a week, it could take 3 weeks to get it there. But as Representative Jennings pointed out, this may not be something that rises to the importance of being set on a Thursday or a day we're debating. So we'll eventually get to 3 days, and those 3 days would pass before turnaround.
Understood. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the bill or the motion? Do not see any. Representative Jennings? To close?
I close.
You heard the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Do you have a question, Representative Carmichael? You're just still voting. Perfect. Thank you, sir. Okay, motion carries. Those that would like their votes recorded, the same list: Kathy, Owens, Hoheisel, Ohabisam, Heiberger, and Carmichael are all yes votes. Now let's go to House Bill 2071.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2071 would increase the criminal penalties for stalking a minor. So we're going to add in KSA 215427 a provision where intentionally engaging in a course of conduct targeted at a specific child under the age of 14 that would cause a reasonable person in the circumstances of that targeted child or a reasonable person in the circumstances of an immediate family member of the child to fear for such child's safety. So violation of that new provision would be a severity level 7 person felony on a first conviction, and then it would escalate to a severity level 4 person felony on a second or subsequent.
Any questions for Natalie? Not see any. Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Jennings.
Natalie, I'm curious, do you know of whether or not in any other criminal statute the phrase or test of a reasonable person in a circumstance is used in terms of a commission of a crime?
Mr. Chairman, it is actually used in this crime up above for different provisions of stalking, uses the reasonable person standard. And then as I'm just kind of going through a search of the criminal code here, I am seeing it in a couple different places in the controlled substances sections, a couple places. In obscenity, for example. So there do appear to be some other references to that standard.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Natalie? Are there any amendments? Not see any. Representative Hoheisel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we pass out HB 2071 favorably.
Is there a second? Representative Humphreys? Discussion? Don't see any. Representative Hoheisel, would you like to close?
I close.
Heard the motion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries. Bill will be recommended favorably. Kathy? We have Representative Owens, Hoheisel, O'Hobson, Heiberger, and Carmichael all voting yes. Now we move on to the three bills that at least initially came over from the AG's office. The first one is House Bill 2079. Natalie?
Mr. Chairman, House Bill 2079 would transfer the duties related to the address confidentiality program. It's also known as the Safe at Home program, from the Secretary of State to the Attorney General. And I can take any specific questions you have.
Any questions? Do not see any. Any amendments? Don't see any of those either. It's the pleasure of the committee on this bill. Representative Jennings.
Could we go back to that order of business? It was inquiry of the reviser.
Sure we can.
Natalie, would there be any reason that you know of that the contents of House Bill 2078 and 2079 could not be combined into one bill, given it is the transfer of duties to the Attorney General from the Secretary of State in both instances?
Mr. Chairman, the only aspect of,
Yeah, no.
2080.
Yeah, 2080, 79 and 80.
mm-hmm. The only aspect of that I will comment on is from like a single subject perspective. And so I believe that both of those topics fall within the same single subject for purposes of constitutionality.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, which one are we on right now?
So we're on 2079. And I'll go back to, are there any amendments? Representative Jennings.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have a written amendment, but as I look at this and think about it, again, thinking about economy of time on the floor, and these are not going to be particularly hot button issues, I would offer an amendment that the committee amend into House Bill 2079 the contents of House Bill 2080 in their entirety.
Second.
So we have a motion by Representative Jennings, a second by Representative Keither. And before we go any further, how about we have Natalie remind everybody what House Bill 2080 was about?
Mr. Chairman, House Bill 2080 would transfer the duties related to the registration for charitable organizations from the Secretary of State to the Attorney General's office.
Okay. And just a reminder, committee, we actually heard these two along with a third, in a sense, a third bill or concept were packaged together in prior sessions. So putting these two together is certainly reasonable. Is there any further discussion on the amendment to combine the 2079 and 2080? Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I would observe that we continue to consolidate power in the office of the Attorney General. And while taken individually, it always seems like a good idea, but I would hope that the committee keep in mind that over the past several years, we have transferred responsibility and authority for numerous functions of state government to the Attorney General's office. I can see the Attorney General's office out the window. They're not getting any more space over there. It's just the AG just keeps asking for more power. And I think we ought to keep an eye on what we're doing here. It also occurs to me that we have another bill lying in the committee unheard that deals with the powers of the Secretary of State and the Attorney General. And it would eliminate the Secretary of State's power to prosecute election crime, but I'm not going to propose to amend the bill just to get my bill passed, but it sure is tempting. I'll go ahead and support this amendment, Mr. Chairman, but I think we ought to keep a careful eye on how much power we're putting in that office, because Derek Schmidt, contrary to what some people think, will not be Attorney General forever. And we've had people in that job who don't have the same legal skill, administrative ability, and integrity as our present Attorney General. So I hope the committee will keep that in mind. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Committee, to address the bill that Representative Carmichael pre-filed that deals with the prosecutorial powers of the Secretary of State, I do intend to set that for hearing. We're waiting on a couple other bills from the Secretary of State's office, and as soon as those get through the process, I want to set them all on the same day if it looks like we're going to have sufficient time, so that's why I've been holding that one.
Mr. Chairman, I did not mean my remarks to be any criticisms whatsoever, because I know we will reach the bill in due course. Thank you.
Got it. Nope, perfect. Any other discussion on the Jennings amendment to combine 2080 into House Bill 2079?
Mr. Chairman, I have my hand up.
Yes, Representative Keither.
Yeah, I did second this motion, but I would just like to back up the comments made by Representative Carmichael. I too share those concerns. It's a lot of businesses going across the street, and I think we need to be aware of that. I did second the motion, and I'll stick with it, and I support it. But I think we need to be aware of what the point he's brought up. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Do not see any. Representative Jennings, would you like to close on your amendment?
I close, move my amendment.
You've heard the motion. All in favor say aye. All opposed say no. Amendment passes. Now let's go back to the bill as amended. Is there any other amendments? Are there any other amendments? Do not see any. Is there a motion concerning the, yes, Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move we pass out HB 2071 as amended.
Is there a second? Representative
I
Schreiber.
think he said 2071. If I misheard, I think we're on 79 and 80.
You're correct, Representative
correct.
Carmichael.
Okay, so
I withdraw that motion and renew my motion to pass out HB 2079 as amended. Favorable.
With a second by Representative Schreiber. Any discussion? Don't see any. We'll go back to Representative Hoheisel to close.
Close.
Heard the motion. All in favor say aye. All opposed say no. Motion carries. With the votes to be recorded, Owens, Hoheisel, Ohabisam, Heiberger, and Carmichael. We can skip over House Bill 2080 and move on to House Bill 2082. Natalie, would you refresh our memory?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2082.
Hold on one second,
Oh.
Natalie. Is there any objection to working this bill? This is the one that we got a new bill brief on yesterday, and just want to make sure everyone's good with proceeding. Don't see any concerns. Back to you, Natalie.
Thank you. House Bill 2082 authorizes the Crime Victims Compensation Board to waive certain application time restrictions and adds certain children to the definition of a victim. So Section 1 amends the definition section within that act to define victim to include a person who suffers injury or death as a result of witnessing a violent crime when that person was 16 years of age or younger when the crime was committed. And then the bill also amends KSA 747305 to remove the individual listings of the sex crimes and replace it with the term sexually violent crime. And then it also allows the board to award compensation for mental health counseling if the board finds there was good cause for the failure to file within that specified 2-year time period. And I can take any questions.
Questions for Natalie? Representative Humphreys?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Natalie, we talked about this, but I just want to make sure I understand that in this section, even though it's talking about sexually violent crimes, in the section where we're changing victim to include children, it's not necessarily sexually violent crimes. Or is it's just violent crimes?
Yes. So if you look, let me find the exact line numbers here. So Yes, so if you look on page 3, starting at line 40, where we're adding that. So for purposes of this act, we're adding just witnessing a violent crime when that person was 16 years of age or younger. And then over in section 2, where we're making those changes, so essentially in section 2, the changes that we're making are, right now it lists all of those sex crimes for, if you're a victim of one of those sex crimes, to be able to count for getting compensation awarded for your mental health counseling. So instead of, because most of those are also in the definition of a sexually violent crime, we're just removing those specific references and replacing it with the sexually violent crime cross-reference over in chapter 22.
Okay, I see. I think I see what you're talking about. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions for Natalie? Okay, are there, yes, Representative Burris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to confirm, and maybe Natalie addressed this to Representative Humphreys, but maybe I didn't hear, but I just wanted to confirm that, sorry, I'm looking at so page 4, lines 32 through 33, sexually violent crime is defined in KSA 2237-17. Would 22, I guess I just want to confirm whether 22-3717 in fact defines that term, a sexually violent crime, to include basically everything that's listed, on page 4, lines 10 through 25.
Mr. Chairman, it might take me a second to cross-reference all of those to verify that. So if you can give me a minute.
Absolutely,
Natalie?
take your time.
I
We're
have that if
cruising.
you would
It's
like
only
me
4
to.
o'clock. You
Perfect,
have a
yes,
whole hour.
yes. Oh, I can't hear you, Bob, anymore. Can everyone else hear him?
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay. Once again, Bob Gallimore, Legislative Research. I did cross-check that list in preparing the subnote. In my comparison, it does include, the definition of sexually violent crime that's referenced does include all of the crimes that are struck. And it would have the effect of also adding, looks like 1, 2, well, I can't say that because some of them are listed separately, but it does add several other crimes that are not currently in the statute.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Natalie or Bob? Do not see any. Are there any amendments to House Bill 2082? See any of those either? What's the pleasure of the committee on House Bill 2082? Representative Hoheisel, the only one that's willing to make a motion around
Thank
here.
you, Mr. Chair. I move that we pass out House Bill 2082 favorably.
Is there a second?
Mr. Chair, I second that as well.
Let's see, let's pass this around because Schreiber and Owens both raised their hand at the same time. We'll give this one to Owens. Schreiber seconded the last one. Any discussion? Do not see any. Back to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I close.
You heard the motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. Motion carries. The affirmative votes that would like to be recorded are Owens, Hoheisel, Ohabisam, Heiberger, and Carmichael. That's it, committee. Good work today. We're not meeting tomorrow. We will see you on Monday. We have a fairly light Monday. We have one informational briefing, and then we have one bill to hear, and then we'll jump back in with a busy week after that. So have a great weekend if I don't see you later today or tomorrow, and we'll see you next week. Thanks. We're adjourned.